So I'm going to try to keep you caught up with how the situation that I ended up in Tacoma protesting the genocide in Gaza came about, even though there's not that much point to it. I mean, if you've watched my other videos, then you don't need me to keep you up to speed about these matters. Whereas if you didn't watch my other videos, you probably won't watch this one. But for the sake of between friends, let's just play the game of refresh my memory. Okay, the first thing to understand is that Robert Fripp of King Crimson, who I used to like because he wrote the song The Night Watch, spent his considerable reputation and prestige and undeniable genius on a fool's gold mission, which is easily debunked. The sum total of all of the argumentation that is delivered from the Jeffrey Corporation, King Crimson, Peter Gabriel, and Hitler Reagan's mystique machine, Axis Hollywood, the whole retinue of people who Nancy Reagan could pull together, like Eastwood and Takai and Steve Hawking and Stephen King, is they use the invisible man argument to claim there is no invisible man. And, sometimes it's very satisfying to realize how empty their emperor's new clothes, um, riding on Paul McCartney's regal reputation, is. They make an invisible man argument to claim there is no invisible man. So let's talk about their invisible man argument. Well, in the 80s, one of the things that happened that was a scandal for the Reagan administration was something that went on in the lead up to Mount Desert Island when I was at Pitt News. It was called the Iran-Contra affair. Now remember, Iran is part of the Republicans' claim it was the axis of evil. And Danny Ortega was the left-wing darling of the day. And Oliver North was a gap to name that. Johnny Tremaine of John Wayne's sect, who bargained with Netanyahu's cronies to smuggle missiles to Iran to get some goober, some dollars, to mine Nicaraguan harbors. As I recall, there were attempts on the lives of American journalists in Florida and so on. This was called the Iran-Contra. And there were in the background other sort of strange dealings with Iran, like the 444 day ordeal of the hostages. It turns out Michael Foucault, the decadent darling of UW Dialectical Intelligentsia out here in Seattle, was meeting with the Ayatollah, was part of a sort of jet set in Paris. Colin Powell was administering these weird sacrileges, which was, of course, all sung and danced with Reagan's holy war crusade of Christianity. They were all fundamentalists. The Zionists, the Iranians, and all of the North were all fundamentalists. So I coined the expression the fundamentalist tripartite. Colin Powell was dancing with Coretta King. Chris Hitchens was mad because he got away with covering for the My Lai massacre, this Colin Powell person. And he, of course, was on 60 Minutes with Robert Fripp's sister, Patricia. And they executed a cover up for Mount Desert Island that traces back to Carnegie Mellon University. Let me give you a taste of Carnegie Mellon University. First of all, Godspell was created at Carnegie Mellon University. Now remember, people who set up Two Virgins Pussy Bowl for the Green Party in the name of advocating for the sexual triumph, the pecking order of Jefferson's favorite, the black men. William Raspberry, Barack Obama, Jesse Jackson were at the jumping hole over a one night stand that Pitt manufactured with a woman from India that was taken as a quid pro quo exchange unit for Midori Goto's war game with the black men, which comes out in the Telltale Clips semi-audio. And Zappa was carrying on about AIDS, and fundamentalists, but he never mentioned Zionists. So it wasn't noticed that he was giving affirmative defense to Gail Burston, who, by the way, is still at large, the author of the Texas School Book script. Nor was Yusu Endor, who had paranormal comprehension that a nerve agent had been used on me. And paranormal comprehension that Midori lay in wait to pull the Two Virgins Pussy Bowl attack. At no point ever, when they were hot-wiring through Martha Hardy Schein's office at Carnegie Mellon University, did it bother them at all that a Jewish Israeli berserker for Trump who writes speeches, ghostwrites for Trump, whose friend worked for John Schulman, who I left the city of Pittsburgh to protest, who was caught with a $6 million museum heist. This man, Adam Eisenstadt, whose friend worked for John Schulman, the thief, went on KDK radio and disguised his voice as Abdul the terrorist. Because I guess Yusu Endor figured a Zionist with Netanyahu is as good as any Abdul when it comes to making a fortune with Frank Zappa. So they told this weird tall tale about Leslie Katz, who introduced me to Matt Marcus and a man named Ben, who had these terrible scars. They were like proto-intestinal scars. Almost something you would think of from Hollywood, which he said was a surgery that went wrong. And never wore a shirt. At Carnegie Mellon University, where she put a poem called Hide Here Under My Cloak, outside an elevator in which these men had scribbled, beat me, make me write bad checks. And Wanamaker had used the nerve agent on me, and Glenn McKenzie was normalizing it. And they wiped their dirt as they walked from Sharilla's conviction to Gaza, where no one was saved. Godspell came from CMU, is my point. Now, the Beatles came claiming something as Invisible Men. They found the script and they were going to use it for spooky shows to quench the involuntary soul force that the Beatles have a monopoly on. Now, when you look at the fact that the attack was from a place where Godspell came from, but enlisted the support of Hare, you start seeing the game plan. There was a man named Hans Jurgenmeister who wrote a book about nationalism and fundamentalism. And he made all the criticisms about the Iran-Contra triangle, systematics, and mindset of these people, but stopped short of condemning it. He said, aha, and used the routine that Amanda Harcourt, the hair attorney, played on me when they had me on the roundtable discussion, pitting me against fundamentalists, which is the desire of the human being to believe the essence is connected to the Creator. Vladimir Putin was nice enough to let me off the hook of my one stupid answer about arms control. I should have said yes, arms control should come before Star Wars. But I guess he sort of saw the sense of my answer, which was it'd be nice if we could phase out nuclear weapons and be free of them. But we don't know what the money's really going to. But anyway, they made it sound like Holy Writ. They should not have been playing this kind of war game with the Pittsburgh public school student and then extracting from the mind of the humanist, because they say, we're at odds, we're armed to the teeth. There have been historical holocausts and genocides. Hitler asked, who remembers the Armenian genocide? I want to get to that as an educational point, because there are people who remember the Armenian genocide, and they're very careful scholastically to preserve it, write poetry about it, and advocate for its victims. And it's humane. Now, I've always been supportive of Simon Wiesenthal's preservation of the memories of Holocaust survivors. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, my obligation to the living outweighs my obligation to the dead. What I would say instead of that is that the two obligations are a little bit different in terms of trust. Preservation of memory and accuracy is our obligation to the deceased. Protection from crime is our obligation to the living. So I think you see my point. Now, Martin Nordenberg was engaging with Adrian Belew, and adults were behind the pedophile abuses that I suffered. And I have paid a really high price for trying to get help from King Crimson. My father was prematurely buried. I was stuck with the nonsense of mocking him after he was gone. And the scorn of the Reagans held dominion indomitably over my personal affairs. I wasn't allowed to have children. I have Parkinson's now. There was no justice regarding how I was deafened. All of which seems to me to be an abridgment of what I was due as a public school student. So Martin Nordenberg and Fripp and Adrian Belew engaged in what is known as a whisper campaign. And this was another aspect of the invisible man. McCartney played, role that McCartney and Harcourt played, with the innuendos on So, which was a puppet machine. Hillary Clinton and David Geffen had the whole thing game plan. Now, if you look back at the Bang for the Benefit of Mr. Kite on Sgt. Pepper's, and think of the lyrics as a semiotic for Mr. K. Lastly, through a hogshead of real fire. And there's the sound of a carousel club, bum, 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 which is where Jack Ruby came from. His establishment was known as the Carousel Club. You see what they did. They used the music as part of the semiotic system that went through film noir. And Reagan set it up to claim he had been shot, but he waved to me the night before. His Secret Service man's name was Enru, like Enru, Rue Morgue, Enru, like the undead. And this fits into their semiotics. Why would they have me on this stage of this movie theater? Zelig, the man the officer said didn't have a mask, a face to call his own, because he's constantly putting on masks, trying to survive brutal torture and manson ordeals as a prepubescent child being used in Pittsburgh. Why would they have Yoko Ono all prepared to pilfer the script and then use it for the Invisible Man show? It was so they could claim there is no Invisible Man, because Casper was the name of the Invisible Man, Lazarus was the name they used, Bly Cinders was the name they used, which means Phoenix or Blaze from the Cinders, and the Walrus, the Invisible Man. They had this whole thing mapped out and planned. Now, it looked to me, and still looks to me, like the Iran-Contra system is still sort of in place with the faux cult crowd. They poisoned me in the mouth when they released COVID. I got a big icky on my lip. They used this gang sign. And they had some guy coming from a Wuhan girls' tea party doing like this, like he was tied up. He's a Burmese guy who's, you know, sort of the local John Kirby. You know, he's a statesman for sociology and UW dialectical. And, you know, they have Aaron Dixon circling me and stuff. You know, saying, and they're all playing Paul McCartney's game. Yoko Ono wants you dead. Yoko Ono wants you dead. It's the only way that you will be liberated to sacred holy martyrdom with Lenin. So I think the supernova rave is what was targeted by the Godspell forces. And then they eliminated Gaza because there's a whole regal system in place with Saudi Arabia and the UAE who support Israel. And they don't like the idea of Arab Spring. Did Barack Obama evoke Martin Luther King during Arab Spring? No, he made sure Mubarak had tear gas. That's Biden's warping time, you know, from the Starship Enterprise with George Takei. So my goal is not to hook up with the resistance forces, the Israelis, or to punish the people who were behind the provocation. It's to protect the children of Gaza. You know, I believe in schools. I mean, it's very offensive to me that they bombed the university in Gaza. I like Palestinian intellectuals. But when you look at people like Owen Jones and Raquel Kellick, they don't have any more veracity or honesty about what was done to me than John Kirby or Matthew Miller have about what was done to Gaza. They literally believe that you can prove there is no invisible man with an invisible man argument. That's all this holy George Monbiot believes Peter Gabriel stuff that comes out of David Cameron's office. You know, it's absurd and it's insane. They used an implant in a child and tortured me. And when I hid in the towel closet, which was a Holocaust simulation experiment response of a frightened vivisection guinea pig of Attica State Prison psychiatrists, they said, don't say like Anne Frank. That's cultural misappropriation. And UW started applauding, right? All the Seattle queers applauded Yoko Ono. Don't say like Anne Frank. That's cultural misappropriation. And what was at the root of this? A girl who had a poem that said, hide here under my cloak. I mean, you can only bark with the big dogs on Adrian Belew's porch for so long before you realize how dizzy and stupid he is, unless he's maniacally cunning. And I gave this postcard that Fripp sent me to Belew because I love them. you know. And that's what got me into trouble with the fundamentalists, because there's all this spiritual pizzazz about love. You know, love will conquer all remorse of man. You know, Casper is more powerful than Weasler. You know, and it gets too ridiculous. What we should be doing is public education and tolerance issues. I mean, there is such a thing as cultural diversity. And I don't think we should be so trivializing of other people's convictions that we start talking about using an atom bomb on Gaza, the way some, I don't even like, it's like a lampoon of the idiotic that actually came from somebody from Congress, evidently. Unless I'm wrong, tell me that I'm wrong. I'd be glad to say that I was wrong about that. In fact, I'm going to say I was wrong about that, because I don't want to believe anybody said anything that idiotic. But when you look at what they're pulling, it's nightmarish. And you know, the ironic thing about the whole thing is that Balakian, who's my source for Armenia's genocide, my poetry teacher, probably took the side of the people who did this, which is, you know, Godspell is using a humanist for some sort of sociopathic performance and saying Reagan didn't know, could have saved John Lennon, when all the evidence shows that John Lennon was part of the plan. They didn't leave it to one exotic, super rich, influential hippie to just happen to go out on the sidewalk where Sean Straub and Mark Chapman were waiting, in a plan that traces back to the Italian futurists of Fayum in 1915 or so. It didn't happen that way. It was, and if you believe it did, you're living in a double fantasy world. The invisible man argument that McCartney is using proves the existence of the invisible man. They even did a dry run, which was called Paul is Dead, that many people remember, which was like an Orson Welles routine with the War of the Worlds, you know. And that's why I have done investigative research. It's one of the reasons I went back to school, was so that I could get the funding for this academic research. It's one of the reasons I'm in therapy. It's because it's so impossible to advise anybody about these matters. They're just like, you know, into the exotica of the McCartney's Regal Emperor's New Clothes drama. And as for the stuff about empathizing with queers and gays, you have to turn back the clock all the way emotionally to see what I went through and why I went through it. And I don't want to do it. I don't have time. You don't want to take my word for it, that's okay. But, you know, it's a mistake. It's a sadistic idea that came from the Japanese mind in the matter. You know, it's the pervert logic of tune, just lashing out, you know, in a way that's bellicose and scary, like an ogre on a mountain throwing huge boulders at passing cars.